In the dimly lit chambers of Renaissance Florence, where shadows danced across marble floors and whispered conversations determined the fate of nations, Niccolo Machiavelli understood a truth that would echo through centuries. The greatest fortress against external destruction lies not in stone walls or armed guards, but in the complete mastery of one's own weaknesses. This principle, woven through his observations of princes and paupers alike, reveals that those who learn to destroy their vulnerable selves become invincible to the machinations of others. The concept emerges not from cruelty or callousness, but from a profound understanding of human nature and power dynamics. When Lorenzo de' Medici walked through the streets of Florence, his enemies could not touch him, not because of his wealth or connections, but because he had learned to eliminate every soft spot that might invite attack. He had become detached from the very desires and fears that make men vulnerable to manipulation and defeat. This transformation requires understanding that weakness is not merely a character flaw, but a tactical disadvantage in the grand chess game of existence. Every emotional attachment that clouds judgment, every desire that can be leveraged against us, every fear that paralyzes decision-making becomes a weapon in the hands of those who would see us fall. The wise individual recognizes these vulnerabilities not as permanent fixtures of personality, but as obstacles to be systematically dismantled. Consider the merchant prince who built his empire in the volatile markets of medieval Italy. His success came not from avoiding risk, but from achieving complete emotional detachment from outcomes. When competitors attempted to manipulate him through threats to his family's safety, they found no purchase. He had already prepared contingencies that removed such leverage. When rivals tried to exploit his known affections for certain luxuries, they discovered he had trained himself to find satisfaction in simplicity. Each potential weakness had been identified, examined, and either strengthened or eliminated entirely. This process begins with brutal self-assessment. The individual must catalogue every fear, every desire, every emotional trigger that could be used against them. This inventory becomes a roadmap for transformation, highlighting the areas where work must be done. The person who fears poverty must learn to find contentment in modest circumstances. The one who craves approval must develop internal validation. The individual who fears confrontation must cultivate the ability to engage conflict when necessary. The elimination of weakness does not mean becoming emotionless or inhuman. Rather, it involves developing such complete control over emotions and desires that they cannot be weaponized by others. The truly detached individual still experiences the full range of human feelings, but maintains enough distance from them to make rational decisions regardless of emotional state. They love, but do not become desperate for affection. They pursue success, but do not become slaves to ambition. They value relationships, but do not compromise their principles for social acceptance. This detachment extends beyond personal emotions to encompass external circumstances. The individual who achieves true detachment remains equally composed whether facing triumph or disaster. They plan for success while preparing for failure, hope for the best while expecting the worst. This equilibrium makes them unpredictable to enemies and reliable to allies, as their responses are based on calculated assessment rather than emotional reaction. The process of self-destruction, the deliberate dismantling of weakness, requires methodical approach and unwavering commitment. It begins with observation as the individual learns to notice their automatic responses to various stimuli. The person who becomes defensive when criticized has identified an area for improvement. The one who feels compelled to justify their decisions to others has discovered a need for external validation that must be addressed. Once these patterns are recognized, the work of transformation begins. This involves deliberately exposing oneself to uncomfortable situations in controlled circumstances, building tolerance for the very experiences that once created vulnerability. The individual who fears rejection begins initiating conversations despite the risk of dismissal. The person who dreads failure starts taking calculated risks in low-stakes environments. Through repeated exposure and conscious choice, what once felt threatening becomes merely information to be processed and acted upon appropriately. The development of detachment requires understanding that most human suffering comes not from external circumstances, but from our emotional responses to those circumstances. The person who can observe their thoughts and feelings without being controlled by them gains tremendous power over their own experience. They respond to insults with curiosity about the insulter's motivations. They face setbacks by immediately focusing on solutions rather than dwelling on problems. They encounter success without becoming intoxicated by praise or achievement. This mastery over internal experience translates directly into external power. Others find it impossible to manipulate someone who cannot be triggered by the usual emotional levers. Attempts at intimidation fail against someone who has made peace with all possible outcomes. Efforts to seduce through flattery or material offers fall short when directed at someone who finds satisfaction independent of external validation or circumstances. A detached individual develops what might be called strategic empathy, the ability to understand others' emotions and motivations without being influenced by them. They can recognize when someone is attempting manipulation through anger, sadness, or charm, and respond appropriately rather than reactively. This clarity of perception, unclouded by emotional involvement, provides significant advantages in negotiation, leadership, and all forms of human interaction. Yet this transformation must be approached with wisdom and balance. The goal is not to become a cold, calculating machine, but to achieve voluntary control over responses, rather than being at the mercy of automatic reactions. The truly powerful individual can choose when to be compassionate and when to be firm, when to show emotion and when to remain impassive. They are not limited by their conditioning or controlled by their circumstances. The journey toward detachment reveals that most of what we consider essential to our identity is actually optional. The opinions we hold, the preferences we maintain, the roles we play, all of these can be consciously chosen rather than unconsciously accepted. This recognition brings tremendous freedom, as the individual realizes they are not trapped by their history, personality, or circumstances. They can consciously craft themselves into whatever serves their highest purposes. In the realm of power and influence, this self-mastery becomes a decisive advantage. Others reveal their weaknesses through their reactions, their desperation, their need to win or avoid losing. The detached individual observes these revelations without judgment while maintaining their own emotional equilibrium. They can afford to be patient while others rush into poor decisions driven by emotional urgency. They can remain objective while others are blinded by passion or fear. The elimination of the weak self is not a one-time achievement but an ongoing practice. New challenges reveal previously hidden vulnerabilities. Success can create new attachments that become sources of weakness. The wise individual remains vigilant, continuing to observe and adjust their responses as circumstances evolve. They understand that the price of true power is eternal watchfulness over one's own reactions and tendencies. This constant refinement leads to a paradoxical result. By destroying what is weak within themselves, individuals actually become more authentically themselves. Freed from the compulsive reactions that once defined them, they can express their genuine nature rather than being limited by conditioned responses. They discover that their true self is far more capable and resilient than the fearful, needy person they once believed themselves to be. The application of these principles extends far beyond personal development into the realm of strategic advantage. Those who master detachment find themselves operating from a position of strength in every interaction, as others struggle to find the emotional levers that no longer exist. This creates a feedback loop where success reinforces detachment, and detachment enables greater success. The historical record provides numerous examples of individuals who achieved remarkable power through this process of self-transformation. They shared certain characteristics: an ability to make decisions based on logic rather than emotion, patience to wait for optimal opportunities rather than acting from urgency, and the wisdom to understand that short-term discomfort often leads to long-term advantage. Most importantly, they recognized that their greatest enemy was not external opposition, but their own uncontrolled responses to that opposition. Consider the diplomatic envoy who must negotiate with hostile parties. Their effectiveness depends not on their ability to make friends, but on their capacity to remain unaffected by intimidation, flattery, or emotional manipulation. They achieve their objectives by staying focused on desired outcomes, rather than being distracted by the interpersonal dynamics of the negotiation. Their counterparts may attempt to provoke anger, inspire fear, or create artificial urgency, but these tactics fail against someone who has learned to observe such attempts without being influenced by them. The business leader, operating in competitive markets, faces similar challenges. Competitors may spread rumors, steal employees, or undercut prices in attempts to create emotional reactions that lead to poor decision-making. The leader who has achieved detachment responds to these challenges strategically rather than emotionally, often turning apparent disadvantages into opportunities. They understand that their competitors' desperate actions often reveal their own weaknesses, providing valuable intelligence for future planning. In personal relationships, detachment paradoxically enables deeper connection. When individuals are not driven by need for approval, fear of abandonment, or compulsive desire to control outcomes, they can engage with others more authentically. They listen without becoming defensive, express opinions without requiring agreement, and offer support without creating dependency. Others find this quality attractive because it represents the rare experience of being with someone who is complete in themselves. The development of detachment requires understanding the difference between caring and attachment. The detached individual cares deeply about outcomes and relationships but remains unattached to specific results. They work diligently toward their goals while accepting that outcomes depend on factors beyond their control. This perspective enables them to invest maximum effort without being devastated by setbacks or intoxicated by success. This distinction becomes crucial in leadership roles. The leader who is attached to being liked makes decisions based on popularity rather than effectiveness. The one who is attached to being right refuses to acknowledge errors or change course when circumstances shift. The leader who has achieved detachment can make unpopular decisions when necessary, admit mistakes without loss of dignity, and adapt strategies based on new information rather than ego protection. The process of eliminating weakness reveals that most human behavior is driven by attempts to avoid pain or secure pleasure. The individual who can tolerate discomfort without being controlled by it gains enormous freedom of action. They can choose the difficult path when it leads to better outcomes. They can endure criticism, rejection, or temporary failure without abandoning their principles or objectives. This tolerance for discomfort becomes a significant competitive advantage in any field requiring persistence and resilience. Yet the journey toward detachment must be approached with careful attention to balance. The individual who becomes too removed from human emotion may gain power but lose the ability to inspire or connect with others. The goal is not to eliminate feeling, but to achieve mastery over feeling, maintaining the capacity for appropriate emotional response while avoiding compulsive reaction. The truly powerful person can be compassionate when compassion serves their purposes, firm when firmness is required, and emotionally neutral when neither response is optimal. This balance requires ongoing calibration as different situations call for different responses. The parent must sometimes show concern to motivate a child while maintaining enough detachment to enforce necessary boundaries. The teacher must care about students' success while remaining unattached to outcomes beyond their control. The entrepreneur must pursue their vision with passion while accepting that market forces may require strategic pivots. The cultivation of detachment also involves developing what might be called strategic patience. Most people operate under artificial time pressures, making hasty decisions to relieve emotional discomfort rather than waiting for optimal opportunities. The detached individual can afford to wait because they are not driven by urgency born of fear or desire. They understand that good timing often determines success more than effort or intelligence. This patience manifests in various ways depending on the context. The investor waits for undervalued opportunities rather than chasing market trends. The job seeker evaluates multiple options rather than accepting the first offer out of desperation. The negotiator allows silence and time to work in their favor rather than filling every pause with unnecessary words or concessions. The ability to wait strategically requires confidence that one can handle whatever outcomes emerge. This confidence comes from the systematic elimination of the fears and needs that create urgency. The person who has learned to find satisfaction independent of external circumstances is not driven to grab immediately available opportunities if better ones might emerge with patience. The detached individual also develops superior observational skills because they are not distracted by their own emotional reactions. They notice subtleties in others' behavior that reveal motivations, fears, and decision-making patterns. This information provides significant advantages in all forms of human interaction, from casual conversation to complex business negotiations. These observational skills extend to self-awareness as well. The person practicing detachment becomes acutely aware of their own thoughts, emotions, and behavioral patterns. They notice when they are beginning to become attached to outcomes or reactive to circumstances. This early warning system allows them to make conscious adjustments before automatic patterns take control. The development of such awareness requires regular periods of reflection and analysis. The individual must honestly assess their recent decisions and reactions, identifying areas where emotion influenced choices that might have been better made through pure logic. This process of continuous self-examination prevents the gradual erosion of detachment that can occur when success breeds complacency or failure triggers desperation. The truly detached individual recognizes that their emotional reactions provide valuable information about their internal state without requiring immediate action based on those feelings. They can feel anger without becoming aggressive, experience fear without avoiding necessary action, or enjoy success without becoming careless. Emotions become data points in decision-making rather than controlling forces. This emotional intelligence, the ability to experience feelings without being controlled by them, proves invaluable in leadership situations. The leader who can remain calm during crises inspires confidence in others. The one who can acknowledge mistakes without defensive reactions earns respect and trust. The individual who can celebrate success without losing focus maintains momentum toward larger objectives. The systematic elimination of weakness creates what might be termed operational resilience. The detached person functions effectively across a wide range of circumstances because they are not dependent on specific conditions for their well-being or performance. They can work productively whether praised or criticized, whether resources are abundant or scarce, whether facing familiar challenges or unprecedented situations. This resilience translates into consistency, which others find reliable and trustworthy. Colleagues know what to expect from someone who responds to circumstances based on principle and logic rather than mood and emotion. This predictability becomes a form of power as others learn they can depend on certain responses regardless of external pressures. The ultimate expression of detachment lies in the recognition that the self itself is a fluid construct rather than a fixed entity. Most people identify strongly with their thoughts, emotions, preferences, and roles, experiencing threats to these elements as existential dangers. The individual who achieves true detachment understands that all aspects of identity can be consciously chosen and modified as circumstances require. This flexibility of self-concept provides tremendous strategic advantages. The person is not locked into patterns of behavior that may have been useful in past situations but prove counterproductive in new circumstances. They can adapt their approach, presentation, and even personality characteristics to match what each situation requires for optimal outcomes. Such adaptability requires deep understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. The truly detached individual studies how different personalities, communication styles, and behavioral patterns affect others in various contexts. They develop a repertoire of possible responses and choose consciously among them rather than defaulting to habitual reactions. This is not deception or manipulation in the negative sense, but rather strategic authenticity, the ability to express different aspects of one's nature as appropriate to circumstances. The parent shows different qualities when disciplining a child than when providing comfort. The leader displays different characteristics when inspiring a team than when making difficult budgetary decisions. The diplomat presents differently when building rapport than when delivering ultimatums. The key distinction lies in consciousness and choice. The manipulative person puts on false fronts to deceive others for selfish gain. The strategically authentic person consciously selects which genuine aspects of their nature to emphasize in each situation for mutual benefit. They remain true to their core principles while adapting their expression of those principles to match what each context requires. This level of conscious self-modification requires extensive self-knowledge and emotional mastery. The individual must understand their own complete range of capabilities and characteristics, not just the narrow band they habitually express. They must also develop the discipline to override automatic responses when strategic considerations suggest different approaches would be more effective. The process involves expanding one's behavioral repertoire through deliberate practice in safe environments. The naturally introverted person learns to be socially engaging when leadership requires it. The habitually aggressive individual develops diplomatic skills for situations requiring finesse. The chronically accommodating person cultivates assertiveness for contexts demanding firm boundaries. This expansion of capabilities does not mean abandoning one's natural temperament, but rather ensuring that temperament serves strategic purposes rather than limiting options. The naturally cautious person maintains their risk assessment skills while learning to act decisively when opportunities require quick response. The instinctively trusting individual preserves their ability to build rapport while developing appropriate skepticism for high-stakes situations. The development of this flexibility requires understanding that different situations genuinely call for different responses. The approach that works in intimate family relationships may prove disastrous in competitive business environments. The style that succeeds in academic settings might fail completely in military contexts. The detached individual recognizes these differences and adapts accordingly rather than trying to apply a single approach across all circumstances. This situational awareness extends to cultural and social contexts as well. The person operating across different social groups learns to adjust their communication style, value expressions, and behavioral norms to match what each group considers appropriate. They maintain their core integrity while respecting the social contracts that enable effective functioning in diverse environments. Such adaptability proves especially valuable in complex modern environments where individuals must navigate multiple roles and relationships simultaneously. The same person might need to function as an authoritative parent, collaborative colleague, respectful subordinate, and diplomatic neighbor, all within a single day. Each role requires different qualities and approaches, and success depends on making conscious transitions between them rather than trying to maintain a single consistent persona across all contexts. The ability to make these transitions smoothly requires what might be called emotional compartmentalization, the capacity to set aside concerns from one area of life when focusing on another. The parent does not bring workplace frustrations into family interactions. The employee does not allow personal problems to affect professional performance. The friend maintains appropriate boundaries between different friendships. This compartmentalization is not repression or denial, but rather conscious management of attention and energy. The individual acknowledges all aspects of their experience while choosing where to focus at any given moment. They understand that trying to address everything simultaneously leads to ineffectiveness across all areas, while focused attention on current priorities enables excellence in each domain. The practice of conscious compartmentalization also prevents the common problem of emotional contamination, where negative experiences in one area of life create negative responses in unrelated areas. The person who has learned to separate different life domains can experience setbacks at work without becoming difficult at home, face relationship challenges without losing effectiveness in professional settings, or deal with financial pressures without becoming irritable in social situations. This emotional discipline requires regular practice and constant vigilance. The individual must notice when concerns from one area are beginning to affect performance in another and consciously redirect their attention. They develop techniques for mental and emotional transition between different roles and contexts, ensuring they bring appropriate energy and focus to each situation. The mastery of these transitions reveals that what we call personality is largely a collection of habits rather than fixed traits. The person who consistently responds to criticism with defensiveness is not inherently defensive. They have simply developed a habitual pattern that can be modified through conscious effort. The individual who typically avoids confrontation is not naturally weak. They have learned responses that can be unlearned and replaced with more effective alternatives. This understanding provides tremendous freedom and power. If personality traits are habits, then they can be changed through the same methods used to modify any other habit: conscious awareness of current patterns, deliberate practice of desired behaviors, and persistent application until new responses become automatic. The shy person can become socially confident. The impatient individual can develop persistence. The pessimist can cultivate optimism, not through denial of reality, but through conscious choice of focus and interpretation. The process of conscious personality modification requires patience and realistic expectations. Deeply ingrained patterns do not change overnight, and setbacks are inevitable during the transformation process. However, the individual who understands that change is possible and approaches it systematically will achieve far greater success than those who accept their current patterns as permanent limitations. This work of self-modification is greatly enhanced by feedback from trusted sources who can observe behavioral changes objectively. The individual seeking to become more assertive benefits from colleagues who can point out when they are succeeding or reverting to old patterns. The person developing patience profits from family members who notice improvements in their responses to frustrating situations. The ultimate goal of this conscious self-development is not to become someone else, but to become the best possible version of oneself. This involves identifying one's natural strengths and talents while systematically addressing areas of weakness or limitation. The result is not a fake persona, but an authentic individual who has learned to express their nature in ways that serve their highest purposes and create the greatest positive impact. The individual who achieves this level of self-mastery discovers that external circumstances lose much of their power to create distress or disruption. They can remain centered and effective whether facing praise or criticism, success or failure, abundance or scarcity. Their well-being and performance depend on their own choices and responses, rather than on conditions beyond their control. This independence from external circumstances represents the highest form of personal power. The person who cannot be shaken by others' opinions, manipulated through their desires, or paralyzed by their fears becomes truly formidable. Not because they seek to dominate others, but because they have learnt to govern themselves completely. In mastering their own nature, they have eliminated the primary source of vulnerability that others might exploit. Such individuals often find that others are naturally drawn to them, sensing the unusual quality of someone who is complete in themselves. They provide stability and strength that others can rely upon, becoming natural leaders not through aggressive pursuit of power, but through the magnetic attraction of genuine self-possession. They inspire confidence because they embody the possibility that humans can transcend their conditioning and limitations through conscious effort and disciplined practice. The journey toward this level of detachment and self-mastery is not easy, but it is perhaps the most valuable undertaking any individual can pursue. In learning to destroy their weak self, to eliminate the fears, dependencies, and compulsive reactions that make them vulnerable to manipulation and defeat, they discover their true strength. They become people who cannot be destroyed by others because they have already done the difficult work of destroying everything within themselves that could be used against them. In this destruction, they find not emptiness but fullness, the complete realization of human potential freed from the limitations of unconscious conditioning. They discover that in losing their small, fearful self, they gain access to capacities and possibilities they never knew existed. The weak self dies so that the strong self can be born, and in this rebirth lies the secret of absolute power over one's own destiny and unshakable influence in the world.